1991, a year of recession, layoffs, and cutbacks. The average American has to get by on $20,145 a year. The nation's top corporate executives are earning hundreds of times that amount. What's gone wrong?
This is ABC News Nightline. Substituting for Ted Koppel and reporting from New York, Forrest Sawyer.
Critics call it a license to steal. The nation's top corporate executives, they say, have set up a cozy little system where they make money, buckets of it, in salary and bonuses and stock options and incentives, even if their company loses money. This year's most publicized case, ITT's chairman Rand Ereskog, who earned more than $11 million last year, while his company's earnings were flat and the stock fell almost 20%. Every year it seems the salaries cannot get any bigger, and every year they set a new record. But now, with the recession biting workers and stockholders alike, sharp questions are being asked. Have America's top executives become the most overpaid managers in the world? And this year, even Congress is asking whether it's time to do something about it. First, some background from correspondent Dave Marish.
Greed has been with us for a while. The legend of King Midas and his obsessive golden touch goes back thousands of years.
Yeah, it's mighty rich. We'll pay good.
How good?
Oh, about 20 ounces a ton.
Some $20 an ounce. How many tons can we handle a week?
The search for the American grail of gold shaped the 19th century and continues to influence this country as we head towards the 21st.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
But today's critics of corporate America say this is greed's big time. Take, for example, these 1990 incomes for some chief executive officers, payouts admittedly inflated by mergers and stock options. Last year, Donald Pelz of LIN Broadcasting made $186 million. Stephen Ross of Time Warner, $78 million. John Scully of Apple Computers, almost $17 million. And Stephen Wolf of United Airlines pulled down more than $18 million in a year when his corporation's profits dropped 71%. That combination enrages flight attendant Julie Wilbur.
I've been here over 19 years, and I'm a shareholder. I'm being expected to take a 2% raise in exchange for givebacks and still not receive a dividend check, while our chairman makes over $18 million. There's something wrong.
CEO Wolf was paid over 1,200 times what his junior flight attendants made last year, and they haven't had a raise since 1986.
Socially, I think it tends to alienate employees. Economically, it tends to divert resources.
When the chairman takes too big a share of resources for himself, several critics say it can hurt American competitiveness, especially in international markets.
An American CEO earns about 150 times the pay of an average worker. And in Japan, the ratio is 17 times. And in Germany, it's maybe 23 times.
The record seems to show that these undercompensated German and Japanese executives are at least as efficient, if not more so, than their better-paid American colleagues.
I mean, they're cleaning our crop.
Bud Crystal helped create the paychecks behind today's cover stories. He pioneered the field of compensation consulting.
The idea was to use greed in a socially useful way, that somebody might be recruited to a company who might not otherwise be recruited.
Today, Bud Crystal teaches about corporate business. His studies show big pay packages don't always pay off.
Doesn't translate into anything, and so then you wonder what you're really getting.
Pump, 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 pump. Stockholders of Reebok may wonder what they've been getting for the pumped-up compensation of CEO Paul Fireman. For the last 3 years, Fireman pulled down more than $40 million. This while arch-rival Nike captured first place in the sneaker market. Nike's CEO was paid about $1 million during the same period.
Any questions?
Yeah, and some worries, too, from New York City's controller, Elizabeth Holtzman. She oversees pension funds, and they own 716,000 shares of Reebok.
When we get executive compensation that's really not tied to corporate performance, then perhaps we're not getting the most effective kind of leadership at the head of the corporations we invest in.
If anyone says to you, American business is doing just fine, boards of directors are just fine, the proxy process is just fine, let the free market set the rates is just fine, this is the smoking gun. It is not just fine.
At a recent Senate hearing in Washington, witness after witness complained that shareholders get no say for their stock purchases, and that a protective buddy system of interlocking CEOs and directors has cut them out of the discussion on how much a boss should be paid.
Shareholders don't want to dictate the precise levels of CEO pay. They can't do that, and that's not their role. But what they do want to do is they want to be able to enforce a rational process for setting the executive pay.
Today's Securities and Exchange Commission rule book prohibits such a role for stockholders. And former Avon product CEO Hicks Waldron, now a compensation consultant, thinks the rule book has it right.
Well, you know, if I were to make a list of the people or institutions least qualified to set CEO compensation, stockholders would be somewhere near the bottom. I guess maybe the Congress would be even lower than that.
Well, look out, Mr. Waldron. Here come the lowly. Senator Carl Levin says he intends to change the rule book.
The issue is whether we should get the federal government off the stockholders' backs so that they can challenge claims of excessive pay.
There's an old saying from Wall Street that every CEO has heard. Bulls sometimes win, bears sometimes win, but pigs never win. For some highly paid, poorly performing CEOs, that old saying could become their epitaph if shareholders can bring them to the butcher's block. I'm Dave Marish for Nightline in Washington.
And when we come back, we will be joined by a former chief executive officer who now sits on the compensation board of some of America's largest corporations, and he says he is satisfied with the way CEOs are compensated. We'll be joined by the CEO of a publicly owned company with an unusual rule. No executive there can earn more than 7 times the salary of the lowest paid employee. And by an author and professor who has compared American CEO salaries to their foreign counterparts and says they're way out of line.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Levi's Dockers.
Man, it's hot. Hot? When I was growing up in Iowa, it got so hot, the tar on the street stuck to your sneakers.
That's not hot. In Texas, we once took an egg outside to see if it would fry on the sidewalk.
Did it?
Don't know. The sucker was hard-boiled by the time we got there.
That's hot.
Yeah, and that was at 7 o'clock in the morning. Relax. You're among friends. Levi's 100% cotton Dockers.
It's amazing how much scrap metal you get from a few cans of beer. Help fight drunk driving. See your Allstate agent. Ever since Mitsubishi Motors began 75 years ago, the diamond has been used as the unbending guiding principle of Mitsubishi quality. The name Mitsubishi means 3 diamonds. Now, for its diamond anniversary, Mitsubishi proudly introduces the Diamante, a new luxury performance sedan that is brilliant in every facet. The new Diamante from Mitsubishi. The word is getting around.
After I created my KC Masterpiece barbecue sauce, I didn't hang up my chef hat. Now here's a great new flavor, bold. Why do I call it bold? Well, here's the recipe. You take a pinch of, and a couple of cloves of, then stir in some. Don't attempt this recipe at home. Go buy new KC Masterpiece Bold. This sauce lives up to its name.
Customs officials harassed for reporting possible corruption in the war on drugs. ABC News investigation on World News Tonight with Peter Jennings tomorrow.
The topic of corporate salaries, in fact, anybody's salary, is a very sensitive issue, and Nightline invited the top 10 CEOs to appear on tonight's broadcast. All of them declined. The Senate Government Oversight Subcommittee held hearings on the same issue last week, and they were also unable to find a CEO to testify there. And so joining us here in New York is Hicks Waldron, the former Chief Executive Officer of Avon and now Chairman of Boardroom Consultants Incorporated. From Portland, Maine is Ben Cohen, the co-founder and CEO of Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream, a publicly owned company with sales last year of $77 million. And from Boston, Robert Reich, author and faculty member at Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government. Dr. Reich, you have certainly heard the argument that this is a competitive marketplace, and to find a top manager is a hard thing to do. He's got a big job. What's wrong with paying some good money for him?
Well, you hear that argument all the time, Forrest. Even though CEOs are reluctant to appear on national television to make that argument, one suspects that the reason they are reluctant to appear on television to make the argument is it doesn't really hold up when you consider that last year the average chief executive officer's bonus and salary and compensation went up 7%, but the average company actually saw a 7% drop in profitability. There's no market working there. That is not a market by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, but they say, hold on a second. Look, we're really being paid in all these kinds of incentives and stock options and those sorts of things for how the company did in the past. You're fooling around with the figures a little bit. Just because this year it didn't do so well, take a look at those other 10 years. We did terrific.
Well, actually, if you look back, and really back at the 80s, much of this extraordinary increase in CEO salaries we're now experiencing, even though everything is dropping, is a legacy of those wild, woolly, greedy years of the 1980s when you had everything from leveraged buyouts to golden parachutes to investment bankers sometimes earning up to $500 million a year. Well, 10 or 15 or $20 million a year for a chief executive officer in those years didn't seem terribly outrageous. Nobody worried about them. But what happened was that those salaries and bonus increases were institutionalized in those companies on, well, for example, pay consultants that are hired by the chief executive officer, compensation committees on the board of directors that are all appointed by the chief executive officer that are comprised of his friends and associates from other companies, chief executive officers. It becomes a very ingrown old boy network that has no relationship to past performance, future performance, to anything except, let's not put too fine a word on it, greed.
Mr. Waldron, in fact, you're one of those consultants, and I think the implication that I'm hearing, and I don't want to do Dr. Reich a disfavor here, but it is that there's an old boy network that works, and you're being paid by these folks, and after all, you're not going to recommend that they take a 50% pay cut.
Well, it's fallacious to assume today that the old boys network that clearly used to be in vogue some years back is still there. Clearly in some companies that is the case. But today boards of directors are much more independent from the management than they have been in the past. Compensation committees really do a good job of identifying compensation programs.
Well, Mr. Waldron, forgive me, but if they're so independent, how is it possible that the salaries have been rising so dramatically over these past 10 years, where now they are paid twice as much in relation to their lowest employee as they were just a few years back?
Well, I think we're looking at two things. First of all, clearly there are some CEOs who are overpaid. And clearly there are some CEOs who are underpaid. And if one would assume that the 90% of the CEOs in the middle are about right, then I think you get a totally different perspective. There isn't any denying that there are some extravagances in the system.
If I can just interject one question, though. If the average CEO is now earning about 85 times the salary and benefits of the average factory worker, we're talking about the average, compare that to Japan, 17 times. Compare it to Germany, 25 times. The Japanese and German companies are much more productive, have been much more competitive than American companies. How can you say that those American salaries are justifiable?
Well, Bob, first of all, those are generalities, and secondly, one just can't compare compensation.
Those are averages. No, you brought up the word average.
Someone can't compare you can't compare the compensation of CEOs country to country without comparing the total culture. And you are well aware of the fact that the cultures in these countries, particularly in Japan, is so different from that of the U.S. that compensation takes many, many different forms.
But you have cultures in which people on a company feel that they're part of the same team. They feel that they are all in it together. Times the corporate CEO making 85, 90 times what the average factory employee, is making, how can people feel that they're part of the same team?
I think that's the feeling prevalent in academia. I frankly don't think that feeling is prevalent in the industry. I don't think it was prevalent in my company.
Hold on a second. That's a good point where I want to take a break here, because we're going to come back and talk to Ben Cohen about how employees feel when their boss is making so much more than they are in just one moment.
Bit by bit, putting it together, piece by piece, the way to make an ideal work.
Behind every accomplishment is a document that bridges the gap between what can be and what will be.
Every moment's contribution, every detail plays a part, putting it together.
Putting together documents that can change the world. Faxing, scanning, copying, printing. Xerox, the document company.
Get gallon after gallon of great savings at Sears' big Memorial Day paint sale. Our premium quality weather beater flat finish is on sale. Just $12.99 for the paint, guaranteed to last for 10 years. But hurry, sale ends Memorial Day at Sears.
If your socks are announcing unexpected new breakthroughs, introduce your feet to ours, Burlington socks. For quality at a price you'll like. Burlington socks. The green C means more sock for the money.
With Matchlight, you get the best charcoal, Kingsford, with just the right amount of lighter fluid already added. That's why there's only one match for Matchlight. Matchlight from Kingsford.
102.9 FM, classic rock. San Diego's 102.9 FM. The most classic rock, guaranteed.
We say no to flimsy. So first of all, we start with a heart of solid brass, which gives Price Pfister faucets every advantage. Solid brass is favored by people in the know, since it's far stronger and lasts longer. Yet our affordability never fails to surprise. So look into and under a Price Pfister, the fabulous faucet with a funny name.
Auto accidents that aren't accidents at all. Crooked doctors and lawyers giving a crash course in insurance fraud.
This is organized crime.
Primetime Undercover Thursday.
The ultimate political insider, tomorrow Clark Clifford, presidential confidant for 5 decades.
Also Phoebe Cates. And later in the week, Bruce Willis on Good Morning America.
We are back with former Avon Chief Executive Officer Hicks Waldron, Ben Cohen of Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream, and with Harvard's Dr. Robert Reich. Mr. Cohen, if I could start with you, it's fair to say, Ben, all right, you're not dressed like your average Chief Executive Officer, but it's, what, a $77 million company, and you've built it up from very little, and you have done that. Am I right in saying that you also tie the top executives' pay to that lowest pay? There's a linkage in there somewhere?
That's correct. We really believe that the issues here are fairness, a livable wage, and linked prosperity. So we believe that as a company prospers, so must the community and all of its employees.
Well, I think what you've heard tonight is the argument that, look, that these chief executive officers have a lot of strain, they've got tremendous responsibilities, and they've got to be compensated fairly for it, and that means that they can make millions of dollars. What's wrong with that reasoning?
Well, I think that everybody at a company has a lot of strain, and we really believe that at Ben & Jerry's the quality of our product is dependent on the quality of our production line workers as much as on our chief executives. We believe that all of our employees are in this together, and so that they need to share in the profits and prosper together.
You think that if the top executives make heavy money and the bottom ones don't, there's going to be a morale problem?
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about it. You know, you read about employee work-life surveys all the time showing that as the spread between chief executive salaries and line-level workers increases, you have less cooperation on the part of the company, and executives and line-level workers feel like they're working against each other instead of on the same team.
Interesting, you mentioned surveys, Mr. Waldron. I happen to have one here from Industry Week. 53% of them say that executive pay discourages them, and some of the words they use are that the pay is way out of line, it's baffling, it's disgraceful, it's embarrassing, it is infuriating, and it's sickening. Now, what they feel is that they're taking a big hit here in a bad time, and the bosses are riding very high. Now, why would they want to work hard for guys like that?
Very good question. These are honestly very tough times that we're going through right now. And compensation is a difficult thing to understand. I'm not sure what survey that you're referring to there, but I think on the other side of that argument is the argument that many employees look at their own CEOs with regard to what the potential may be in that management structure for their own promotion.
Oh, come on.
Sure.
When they're having a tough time, don't you think that they want them to put a notch in their belts along with the rest of them?
Well, I think that's true. And I think most, I'm not sure about most CEOs, but many are taking a notch in their belt. I serve on 3 compensation committees, and 2 of those compensation committees have developed compensation levels this year that are below the compensation in the previous year for salary and bonus. Now, as you mentioned earlier in the program, there are long-term compensation programs that result in published dollar figures that are paid for the last 5 or maybe even 10 years.
Dr. Reich, is there a way to tie some greater accountability into all of this? Is that needed?
Well, the accountability is the word for us. There's a lot of rhetoric coming out of corporate boardrooms these days about pushing responsibility down to lower-level employees, flattening the hierarchy, creating a team. This is an endless stream of rhetoric, but it is belied by the reality of these sky-high salaries. It seems to me the only way you're going to get real accountability is if institutional investors, the pension funds, the mutual funds, the large holders of corporate stock start really policing what's going on and setting some limits.
I'm not at all sure that's going to do an awful lot of good for American business. What we're talking about here is an issue that has nothing to do with how much money a corporation makes in terms of the CEO's compensation. You take a company that's worth $5 billion in the marketplace today and the CEO is making $5 million, that's 0.001% of the value of that corporation.
All right,
there
Ben,
isn't any way that you're going to affect the profit.
Ben, jump in here. Do you agree with people who say that no matter whether it be 0.001%, it still amounts to greed if it's that kind of figure?
The issue here is not what percentage it is of gross sales. The issue is how much more is the chief executive making than the line-level workers. And I don't see any way that you can justify somebody making $1 million or more a year when their line-level workers aren't making enough money to afford a house.
There ought to be a presumption that if the top-level CEO is making more than 20 times the bottom-level worker, then some question has to be raised. There has to be some justification. There has to be some special purpose for that.
Oh, Bob,
and we are way out of line.
Don't you think that would vary drastically by industry?
It might vary by industry, but there ought to be an explanation. You see, right now, what is happening on a lot of compensation committees is that the people on the compensation committee, again, who are very often friends or on another company, there's a lot of mutual back-scratching, but they take a look at another company in that same industry and they say, gee, we don't want our CEO to be paid less than that CEO over there. In fact, we want our CEO to be paid even more, and therefore there's a kind of ratcheting up effect.
Right.
Every company in the industry pushes things up, and again, it's unrelated.
Gentlemen, let's hold it right there because it's a fair question to ask. How much is enough, and how do you begin to put some rationality into a system which is paying its CEOs tens of millions of dollars? We'll be back in just one moment.
Mary Brody won't feel the tiny lump in her breast for another 2 years, but she'll discover it tomorrow after her first mammogram, thanks in part to a new X-ray film created by DuPont that makes it safer to start mammography early. And for Mary, early detection means a 2-year head start on the rest of her life. At DuPont, we make the things that make a difference.
You're at a stoplight. It will last 20 seconds. This may be the only time some people ever see you. How do you want to be remembered?
Pool is like life.
How so?
I don't know. I just remember a guy said that to me once, and I never asked him what he meant.
Why not?
Well, I didn't want to sound stupid.
Saving it up, huh?
Relax. You're among friends. Levi's 100% cotton Dockers.
The human shoe. It poses no threat. The aerosol spray, roaches can just hide inside walls. The household fogger, roaches can simply avoid the area. The combat roach control system. After roaches eat the poison, they carry it inside the walls, where more roaches eat it and die. With combat, there is no hope. There is no escape.
Ben, you just heard Robert Reich talking about that old boy network that is established in publicly held companies with the directors and the CEO. Now, yours is a publicly held company. Is it true that the CEO can, with the directors, go dancing anywhere he wants and not worry about the shareholders?
I guess to some extent, but in our company, our values keep us from doing that. And our values say that let's pay our line-level workers as much as we can possibly afford to pay them, and let's pay our chief executive officer and our upper-level officers less money and try to bring the two together.
That's fine, but you see where I'm going. Is there a way to implement a system which doesn't have those values, whereby the shareholders can begin to hold down those salaries?
Well, I think shareholders can always sell their stock, and they can always exercise their right to vote.
Dr. Reich, what about it? Is there a way to begin to break this? It's almost like asking a single voter if there's a way that he can do something to help elect the president. It doesn't seem like much.
That's right. Individual shareholders are relatively powerless. This is why I go back to the pension funds, the insurance companies, the mutual funds, the big shareholders that can exert influence. They have a lot of stock. The companies have got to listen to them. You know, companies, again, are not just a collection of assets. Ben Cohen, I love your company. I love your ice cream. I look at a lot of companies. People want to work for your company. Low-level employees, they're talent that comes to your company because they feel that they are treated well. That word commitment is key to competitiveness, key to productivity. When you have other companies with these giant gaps between the highest level and the low level, you don't have commitments.
Mr. Waldron, you've got just about 20 seconds here. You know there are a lot of people who are looking at you askance tonight when you're justifying salaries that are tens of millions of dollars. They're wondering what's wrong with you.
Well, first of all, I'm not justifying salaries that big. I did say there were some extravagances at the top end of the scale. But let me just say, in terms of the Good Old Boys Club, the compensation committees today, and as I mentioned, I'm serving on 3 of them, are well aware of the debate that took place here this evening and are doing their job in getting this thing taken care of.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight and for a good conversation. Finally, this program note, tomorrow night on World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, a special ABC investigation on allegations of corruption within the U.S. Customs Service. But that is our report for tonight. I'm Forrest Sawyer in New York, and for all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been ABC News Nightline.
Nightline is a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.